In this episode of Winning Ways, we talk to Puneet Pushkarna, who is the chairman of TiE in Singapore and the general partner of Solmark, a private equity fund focused on entrepreneurs. Hi Puneet, thanks for joining us.
Hello, hi. Thank you for having me here.
How's business at Solmark? I mean, there's been so much of buzz around startups and entrepreneurs. So what's been happening at Solmark?
Well, just let me tell you a little bit about Solmark first, and I'll tell you what we're doing at Solmark then and how business is. So we're actually 6 partners. 4 of us have been together now for over 30 years. And we decided that we've been actually running businesses. There are a number of businesses that we ran together. And after our last exit, we figured that instead of really going out to start yet another startup ourselves, because we had some capital, a lot of gray hair, so hopefully that translates to wisdom, and a good Rolodex, since perhaps collectively through the number of different ventures that we've been involved with, we've had about 60 to 80,000 people who worked with us. We figured with that kind of a Rolodex, with that capital, maybe it's time for us to get on the other side, which is to start a fund. So Solmark is really, like you said, a fund as a private equity fund for entrepreneurs. And what we do is we actually take positions in young startup companies, not really startup, actually growth capital is what I would define. Companies started by entrepreneurs that have gotten to about 50 to 100 million in size, and they're now ready to actually get to the next milestone, which is the 500 to $1 billion. And in our experience, when they get to 50 to 100 million dollars, there is what we call actually the valley of death or the graveyard, and it's very difficult to cross that. That requires to rejigger your mindset, to really start thinking about how do you put process, how do you put new methodology, how do you actually get a different kind of talent to help you grow. And so in trying to address that segment is what really Solmark's philosophy has been, and that's who we are backing. So to date, we've made a number of investments, and we look at companies that are have a very good set of talent, B, are in a sector that is poised for massive amount of disruption. So those are the 2 tenets really behind of how we invest into companies.
So other than investing in terms of funds, do you also get involved in probably hand-holding them or mentoring them or helping them overcome that particular hurdle that you were mentioning about in terms of growth?
Sure. In fact, the whole philosophy of Solmark is a very strong touch. So we're very intimate with the teams that we invest with. So there's always a professional CEO and his management that's actually running the organization. And while we may not take an operating position and we work from the board, but we're mentoring, constantly coaching the teams in terms of what the product roadmap should be, how the talent capital should be developed, how the geographical reach should be expanded, what are the new challenges that are coming down the pike in their particular industry, and helping them figure that out and try and work solutions, around those. So we're very heavily engaged, and so it's not a hands-off, only a once a quarter board meeting, but this is something that we're actually involved with these people, on a very regular basis, weekly, sometimes, even more than once a week as well.
So you worked for a long time with some of the large companies in the US, and then you set up and you have exited a few companies. So and now you are an investor. So what's your take on the current buzz around startups? I mean, what do you see the whole environment coming to?
So I must say that before I moved to Singapore in 2010, I was in the Silicon Valley for 20 years before that. So from 1990 to 2010, I was in Silicon Valley. And being in the Valley, which is kind of like the mothership for all of startups, etc., it demonstrated to me how you can actually create massive amount of disruption. You don't need very heavy capital intensive organizations, and yet in a very short period of time you can actually have an impact, and at the end of it you can also create a lot of financial wealth for yourself as well. So that's really what my background was. And so when we came to Singapore, I realized that Singapore is also well poised in that journey as they have gone through, and it's very commendable in terms of what Singapore has gone through. But as they're looking for their next journey as well, the innovation and entrepreneurship journey is well embraced by Singapore. And so really, I felt I was lucky enough to be part of this journey, to come from my background and experience in Silicon Valley and bring that to bear to the current ecosystem here. The startup environment here is actually quite a buzz. It has a lot of government support. It's got the right educational institutes which are actually bringing out talent from that perspective. It's got capital providers. So the mix is actually very good. It also is a place that has very high sense of governance and transparency. And to me, in fact, when people talk about capital, mostly people think about financial capital or human capital. I think the biggest capital that Singapore has is one of governance and transparency. So if I'm an entrepreneur in this region, if I'm in Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Burma, wherever, I would like to actually be in Singapore, because it's much easier to do business over here. It's much easier to attract outside talent to come over here. So therefore, we're today, I think, poised at the right place, and you're starting to see that the buzz around this whole startup scene is quite high.
So you also don the hat of being the chairman of TiE in Singapore. How is TiE really working within the startup ecosystem in Singapore?
So maybe a word about TiE. TiE's whole genesis was actually around entrepreneurship. In fact, we like to say that just as you open a computer and you say Intel inside, for TiE we say the entrepreneur inside. So really the reason for existence for TiE is to actually foster entrepreneurship. And what TiE does is I like to call the 4 C's of being a management student. I read earlier on, Philip Kotler said the 4 P's, and that's a very succinct way to actually drive home the message of marketing. So we like to call the 4 C's of what we do here. We are able to bring the capital providers. We're able to bring massive amount of connectivity, because TiE has over 60 chapters. We have over 13,000 people across the globe. So anybody who's starting actually a business today wants to, even though the business may start local, definitely wants to go regional, and at some point in time has aspirations to go global. So with that kind of a large network, we're able to provide that kind of a connectivity. The third thing is that within TiE, there is very deep domain knowledge about different sets of businesses. So TiE charter members across the globe, they run very big businesses, and so we're able to actually tap to that domain knowledge very well. So if you're starting a business, let's say in clean tech today, Vinod Khosla is one of the premier names in the whole clean tech space. If you wanted to start something in the biotech space, Kiran Majumdar with Biocon, she's a big name in that. So like that, we actually have thought leaders in each of those spaces, and that's a big capability that we can set, target. And the last and perhaps the most important C of the whole ecosystem is coaching. So mentoring is very much integral and fundamental to what TiE does over here. Because we do that, and because there is a lot of also the question of being able to provide capital, so we actually see a lot of new ideas, come through TiE. We actually are able to mentor some of them. We're able to fund some of these people through our members companies, and basically be in the midst of all of it. Ultimately, we started our history at TiE back in 1992 from Silicon Valley. So one other role that we play here in TiE is to connect the TiE chapter in Singapore to a number of other ecosystems across the world, like in Israel, Silicon Valley, etc. And so that's actually one thing which I think perhaps distinguishes TiE from many of the others doing similar role, but that's our biggest value add.
Coming back to the startups, I mean, you were a startup at once upon a time, and now these days you work with startups. What, according to you, are the critical factors which determine the success of a startup? Are you, like a doctor, able to feel the pulse of a startup?
Yeah, again, we're very heavily biased towards actually the team, frankly speaking. So if I were to say the one single success factor behind something that would help me determine whether the company is going to succeed or not, the one marker is the team. So that's the first thing that we look at, is the team. And fortunately, we actually have some very talented players here in the local Singapore ecosystem. The second thing that we look at is really the sector. So is the sector doing well or not, right? I mean, if 50 years ago, perhaps I would have been very gung-ho if I was in India investing into the steel sector. 20 years ago, I would have been very gung-ho investing into the steel sector in China. But today, perhaps that's not the biggest growth sector, so to speak, for me. So we look at new businesses coming up, what sector they're involved with, where they're playing, and that's how we actually make a determination. And those two things combined, one, the team, and B, the sector that they're playing in, are perhaps the most heavily weighted factors that we look at when we're actually looking at the startups.
From a startup perspective, is the idea more significant, or is it all about execution and scalability?
There is always these two camps, and so one likes to deride the other. But I always say that in a corporate strategy, you spend perhaps 5 or 10% of your time in developing a strategy. 90 to 95% is actually what is spent in execution. So execution rigor is something that is very paramount. If you don't have a very good idea to start with, you cannot get started. But having gotten a good idea, you cannot succeed unless the execution rigor is very, very strong. So at the very early stages of a startup, maybe that idea is important, and therefore to be able to take that idea and then put it into an executable form is important. But as the startup starts to grow, then it's really the execution capability, frankly, that determines from what is a successful startup to what is a not so successful startup. So in the end, my bias is towards execution.
Okay. You've been in the technology area for over 2 decades in the Silicon Valley, and you've seen a host of technologies come, go, some of them mushroom, develop further. What is there on the anvil, or rather on the horizon, that attracts you today? I mean, what kind of technology do you think would be the technology of the future?
I don't profess to be a soothsayer here and to be able to look at that, but I think certainly some things are quite apparent. I don't think I'm saying anything that is, very revolutionary or being revealed for the first time, so to speak. But clearly, technology is moving towards where things like the Internet of Things, etc., is a very big thing. We'll start to see as cost of industrial sensors starts to come down, and more things will start to actually have sensors embedded into them, and therefore the internet will actually start to touch us in many more ways than what we imagine today. So computing power is going up, in an asymptotic curve. The internet is almost going to become ubiquitous and available everywhere. Bandwidth is not going to be constrained. So the kind of businesses that you see today that are coming up will be very different than what we see as of now. So my bias is towards those businesses again.
What are the 3 factors or 3 areas you would tell new entrepreneurs to be wary of so that they cannot trip and fall?
It's I think we talked about earlier on about execution. I think to have a very good execution plan, I think, is fundamental when we get past the team and we get past that the sector is something that's interesting. Then we look and see what is the execution plan behind this thing. How are they going to execute? How are they going to grow? How are they going to put their mental acumen behind this whole situation. So to me, that is something that I tell people that definitely have a very well thought out and execution plan and continue to refine it. Since you and I both wear glasses, I'll give you my favorite analogy is the ophthalmological analogy, is that when you and I don't know that we see well, we just go to a doctor and say, hey, I can't see very well. And the doctor says, try this, till the point we say, voila, now this is the right thing. I see, this is my prescription and I see it well. Try lots of things in the space because you don't know exactly what's going to succeed. And of course, just like us, every 3-5 years, our prescription is going to change. So also the market is going to change because the regulatory pressures are going to be different. The technology evolution is going to be different. The consumer behavior is going to be different. So you have to reset yourself every once in a while to say that the idea that I started with, is that relevant today or not? Has my competition caught up? Has something come up from a technological perspective that's disrupted it completely? There's this famous case about the Argentina car wash industry, that went through a massive amount of disruption, not because what happened in the car wash business, but because weather apps became very, reliable. So people started to look at those apps and say, oh, if it's going to rain today, then I don't necessarily need to take my car for a car wash. And as the reliability of those apps started becoming better, the car wash industry, started to actually change. And therefore, today you are not sure what is going to hit you. It's not necessarily my business plan, my bill of material, my development. Something else might come completely from left field and actually impact it, something that I'm not even remotely thinking today. So I think, again, think of what are the risks and how am I going to mitigate those things as I move forward. And the last and another very equally important part is really constantly think about talent. In the end of the day, I think any CEO that you talk to, really his biggest job is to how do you actually continue to increase the human capital and how do you continue to attract very good people so that the company continues to be on the trajectory that he's or she's charted out.
Thanks, Puneet. Thanks for joining us.
Sure. Pleasure. Thank you very much.